that he believes is right, and that's what we're about to discuss. So chapter 4 is again a continuation of the theme that there has to be two witnesses. The question is, what does it mean that there are two witnesses? Do they have to? Simply, it just means two witnesses are seeing and testifying to the same event. The question becomes, when you say two witnesses, is there some relationship between the witnesses and each other? In other words, the idea here is that, according to this opinion, and the opinion in the Talmud, and the Maimonides rules according to this opinion, the witnesses actually have to see each other. So it's not enough that I saw the crime or the event and you saw the event, but also if we're both witnesses, then we have to see each other. And the question, of course, is why is that important? Where is it derived from? So for that, we're going to have to go a little beyond what Maimonides himself writes, because like I said, Maimonides in this work is primarily does not give reasons, he just quotes the law. So we'll read Maimonides inside and we'll see what we can think of, what we could come up with. Of course, we'll also continue on the previous theme that we mentioned before, is that the rabbis are lenient when it comes to monetary law. In other words, biblically speaking, the concept that both witnesses have to see each other is applied to capital punishment in capital cases. But when it comes to monetary law, as we will see played out throughout this chapter, the rabbis sort of lower the bar and do not require this high burden of two witnesses having to see each other. So Rabbi, we'll begin. Yes.
I have a question. Does that mean that the witnesses have to have another witness confirm that they are witnesses? Is that
no? But each witness. Oh, you're saying that's the reason. You're proposing that to be the reason?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of. That could be. I think that may very well be. In other words, what Jill is saying is as follows. Let's say Jill and I both come to court and we both testify saying that a loan took place or a crime took place. If I saw the example that Maimonides quotes is, let's say I saw the event from one window and Jill saw the event from another window, but I have not seen Jill and Jill has not seen me. So biblically speaking, that testimony is disqualified. And practically speaking, it's disqualified in capital cases. What is the reason? So the reason is going to be, there's verses where this reason is derived from. There is a verse that we'll discuss that where this law is derived from. But Jill is offering a logical explanation. And the logical explanation that Jill is offering, which I think makes sense, is that in essence, when we both see the event together, we are also testifying that the other one was there. So when I say we saw it, I'm testifying on behalf of Jill. When Jill says we saw it, she's testifying on behalf of myself, on behalf of me. Now, if each person saw the event independently and they didn't see each other, then it could be I've seen it, but you have not. So we're just going by your word. So I guess it's stronger when both people see each other and each one, even though not explicitly, but implicitly, they are testifying and they are testifying and confirming and approving that the other was there. That's one opinion. I think that's logical. Another suggestion is possible is that it's if I could. I guess another possibility would be that the judges interrogating the witnesses want to know where I stood, where you stood. And if they look at each other and see where each other stood, then they could start thinking about angles. Was it possible that you saw it? Was it possible that you didn't see it? I think it opens up more of a range of possible questions and therefore allows for a deeper analysis. If I know that both witnesses saw each other and we know where they stood in relation to the event, that may be easier to then discern whether or not this is an accurate testimony. But that's the logic, and that is a possible savara, possible reason. that's a possible reason, but it does. I don't think it says so explicitly.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to read the first law inside, and then you tell me, and then we'll discuss it a little bit, and then we continue. So both witnesses in cases involving capital punishment must see the person committing the transgression at the same time. They must deliver their testimony together in the same court. These requirements do not apply with regard to cases involving financial matters. Like we said before, that the Torah is more strict when it comes to capital crime, capital cases, than when it comes to monetary law. And therefore, when it comes to monetary law in general, we lower the bar of what is required. And therefore, here, when it comes to monetary law, we see not only that you need two witnesses, but the two witnesses have to see each other. And here, we're going to offer the example. Second paragraph, what is implied? If while looking from one window, a witness saw the person commit the transgression, and the other witness saw him from the other window, their testimonies can be combined if they see each other. If they cannot see each other, their testimonies cannot be combined. So in other words, we're both looking at a certain event from different windows. You're standing on the second floor, looking out the window. I'm standing on the third floor, looking out the window, and we see the same event. Says Maimonides, these two testimonies, the testimony of these two witnesses can be combined to be considered an accurate testimony if, in other words, a proper testimony, if both witnesses saw each other. That's Maimonides' opinion. Now, there's one more way where we can include both witnesses, the testimony of both witnesses, even if they have not seen each other. And that is, there's another component that we have not discussed in the laws of witnesses, because it's not relevant to the laws of witnesses, but it is relevant to other matters. When it comes to capital crime, when it comes to capital punishment, for the court to actually administer a capital punishment, the person has to be doing the act on purpose. So the rabbis say, well, you don't know if the person did it on purpose. Maybe he didn't know that it's a prohibition. Maybe he knew it's a prohibition, but he didn't know the consequence. And according to the Torah, it's very important. The only way the court could impose a corporal or capital punishment is if we're sure the person was well aware, not only that the act is a prohibition, but that of what the consequence is going to be. And therefore, in a capital case, there's something called hatra'ah, which means warning. The person has to be, the person committing the crime has to be warned, has to be told what you're about to do is not only a crime, but it's punishable by death, or which form of death, which form of capital punishment, and the person has to be warned. So we can discuss that maybe at another time. Obviously, it makes it even harder to prosecute crime if you need to have somebody, not only two witnesses, but you actually need somebody who would warn the criminal that what they're about to do is a crime and punishable by this specific punishment. So that's a whole nother discussion. But let's assume we accept that concept. It says Maimonides, if you have two witnesses who don't see each other, however, the person who's warning the criminal actually does see both witnesses, right? So you have two witnesses. The two witnesses don't see each other, but there's a third guy that sees both witnesses. In that case, says Maimonides, that's okay. The third guy warning will combine both witnesses to be considered one unit, even though in reality the two witnesses have not seen each other. So that's sort of another way of combining both witnesses, even if they have not seen each other. So I'll read that inside again. Middle of the second paragraph. If a person who administered the warning sees the witnesses and the witnesses see him, because of the person administering the warning, their testimony is combined, even though they do not see each other. So that is the principle regarding capital punishment and corporal punishment as well. What is the source for this law? So Jill offered a logical interpretation, which I like, but there's also a biblical source. In other words, a lot of this law has to be derived from the Torah, something that the Torah itself said. So the Torah does not say so explicitly, but it's implied. And here's the verse where we derive this concept. So the verse says, a person should not be killed based on one witness. Okay? Straightforward verse, right? A person should not be killed based on one witness. Okay, fine. The question then becomes, why do you have to say that verse? There are many verses that say that you need two witnesses. So why is it that the verse has to say you should not kill someone based on one witness? Don't we know in many places that in the Torah that two witnesses are required? So the concept that the verse has to say, don't kill someone based on the testimony of one witness, that's superfluous. So the Talmud says, and I have to put on your Talmudic hat, the Talmud says, when the verse says, don't kill someone based on one witness, they don't mean one witness. That would be obvious. That you derive from the other verses that say you must have two people in order to impose capital punishment. So what does this verse mean? This verse means don't kill someone based on one witness, meaning to say one witness and one witness. There are two witnesses, but they're not combined. They're separate. So it's 1 + 1, but it's not 2. And why is it 1 + 1? Because indeed, witness A saw the act, witness B saw the act, but witness A did not see witness B did not see witness A. And because they have not seen each other, therefore, they are not combined and they're considered as two individual units as opposed to one collective testimony of two witnesses. And like I said, some of us weren't on the call, but Jill offered, and I agree, I was probably going to say something similar. Jill explained that when you have two witnesses who testify, and those two witnesses actually see each other, and they testify that not only did the event happen, but I saw the other witness, and the other witness says, I saw the other, witness A says, I saw witness B, and witness B says, I saw witness A, you're having an additional level of authenticity here because not only are two people testifying about the act, but each witness is really corroborating and testifying that the other witness was in fact there. By saying, I saw you, meaning I'm testifying that you're there. When you say you saw me, you're testifying that I was there. So that's another interesting, important component. Now, we get to the same concept that we discussed many times before. And when it comes to monetary law, the rabbis lower the bar, they're not so strict. And they say the witnesses do not have to see each other. By the way, it's a question of whether or not this is a rabbinic dispute, a rabbinic leniency when it comes to monetary law, because some people believe that this verse only, even from the perspective of the Torah, this verse only applies to capital punishment, because that verse that I quoted you before, a person should not be killed by the testimony of one witness. And we said that verse means, it doesn't mean you shouldn't kill someone based on one witness. That would be obvious. It means don't kill someone based on two witnesses, but each one is one because they have not seen each other. That is written in the context of capital crime. So many people believe that when it comes to monetary law, even from the perspective of the Torah, these witnesses, two witnesses that have not seen each other, actually could combine. And now we have interesting examples. And with the examples, once you get into the details, things start getting interesting. So we're going to turn to number 2. If you have the handout, it's the second page. If you don't have the handout, it's okay. Eidu chapter, Laws of Testimony, chapter 4, the second section. With regard to cases involving financial matters, by contrast, even though they did not see each other, their testimony can be combined. And here we have an interesting case. What is implied? One witness says, in my presence, he lent money to him on this and this day. Or in my presence, he acknowledged the debt. And the second witness says, I also testify that he lent him money or acknowledged the debt on a different day. Their testimony can be combined. Oh, this gets interesting. The reason why it gets interesting is it's because it's a little bit controversial. Not everybody agrees with Maimonides on this. So here's a scenario. Two witnesses come to court. One person says, two witnesses come to court. One witness says that they saw that I, Menachem, borrowed $100 from Jill. When did I borrow $100? On Monday. That's witness A. Witness B shows up and says, they testify that I, Menachem, borrowed $100 from Jill on Tuesday. So not only do these witnesses not testify that they have seen each other, in other words, we don't have two witnesses saying that we both together witnessed this transaction, but it's actually even possible that it's two separate transactions, right? Because one testifies about a $100 loan on Monday, and the other testifies about a $100 loan on Tuesday. So Maimonides says that because it's monetary law, we actually believe both witnesses, we combine their testimony, we consider it as if we have two witnesses testifying that I, Menachem, owe Jill $100. Why? You would argue there are no two witnesses because the witnesses have not seen each other. Not only they have not seen each other, they're actually not even testifying about the same event, perhaps. Nevertheless, yes.
Yeah, but in a way, it may not be the same event, but it concerns the same event. I signed on, I mean, if between you and me, I signed on Monday, but on Tuesday, I admitted to the second witness that I borrowed from you. I mean, I'm arguing the wrong side. But so there are two witnesses to the event, but there was the same kind of evidence.
Okay, so you are correct that if it's a case that both stories could be true, then everybody would agree that it's a proper testimony. I'm going to go even farther. There's a case in the Talmud where one person says that I borrowed 100 coins, but the coins were dark. You know, then the currency then was metal. So the coins, the silver or the gold or the copper, whatever it was dark shade. And the other person says, I borrowed $100, 100 coins from Jill, and it wasn't dark, it was actually nice and polished, right? So we have two witnesses clearly testifying about two separate events. What they have in common is that both say I owe Jill $100. So now the question becomes, can you combine both these witnesses? So Maimonides seems to be saying yes. Other authorities say you can only combine the two if there is a possibility, like Jill is offering, if there's a possibility that both those stories are true. So what do I mean?
Rabbi, you can
ahead.
say that both these stories, there's an element of truth and the commonality is 100. So you know at least 100 coins are involved here. So you can combine it partially.
Okay, so you're defending Maimonides. Very good. I'm going to offer the other opinion, the other perspective, just to create some action here. Suppose witness A says, I owe Jill $100. I borrowed $100 from Jill on Monday. Witness B shows up and says that I owe Jill $100 because I borrowed $100 from Jill on Tuesday. What's the law? Maimonides says you can combine both witnesses, and I owe Jill $100. Other opinions say you can only combine both opinions if the claim of the plaintiff, if Jill's the plaintiff in this case, if Jill claims that I owe her 200. Okay, so I hope you follow here. Jill, in other words, let's say Jill claims that I owe her 200. And then one witness shows up and says, I owe Jill, Menachem owes Jill $100 because I borrowed $100 on Monday. Another witness shows up and says, I owe Jill $100 because I borrowed $100 on Tuesday. Maimonides says it's no problem. Maimonides says in all cases you can combine the testimony. Other authorities say no. You can only combine both witnesses if the claim of Jill is that I owe her 200. Because if Jill's claim is that I owe her 200, then both those claims can be correct. But if Jill insists that I only owe her 100, then Jill is really contradicting the witnesses because the witnesses are testifying to two separate events. Monday, $100 loan, and Tuesday, $100 loan. So the authorities that disagree with Maimonides would say that in that case, we don't combine them because we don't have two witnesses testifying over the same act. If, however, Jill says that I owe her 200, and she produces one witness that says that there was one loan on Monday for $100, and another witness that says that there was another loan for $100 on Tuesday. In that case, says those people who argue with Maimonides, then they can combine both. Why can you combine both? Because everybody is right. In other words, it's possible Jill's right, I owe her $200. One witness saw one half, and the other witness saw another half. We combine the two, but because each witness only testifies in one half, but they all agree that I owe you $100, so they only have to pay $100. But everybody can be right. Which reminds me of the joke. I know it's getting a little complicated here, so I'll say a joke. The joke is that two litigants come before the rabbi, and the rabbi listens to litigant number one. And litigant number one puts out the claim. And the rabbi turns to litigant number one and says, you know, you're right. So then the rabbi says, litigant two, what do you think? What do you have to say? So litigant two makes his claim. So the rabbi turns to litigant two and says, you know, you're also right. The rabbi's wife is standing in the room and she says, Rabbi, they both can't be right. How could they both be right? So the rabbi turns to her and says, you know what? You're also right. So it's a joke, but in this case, it's possible that three people, it's a very interesting case here. Three people are saying three different things, but they all can be right, and therefore we can accept the testimony. What's the scenario? Jill says, I owe her $200. Witness A says, I borrowed $100 from Jill on Monday. Witness B says, I borrowed $100 from Jill on Tuesday. Every single statement, all those statements can be correct. We combine them and say, I have to pay Jill only $100. Why $100? Because she doesn't have witnesses for $200. She only has witnesses for $100. So that is the discussion here. At how much are you allowed to combine the testimony of two witnesses and combine them and consider it one testimony? We know when it comes to when it comes to capital crime, you can't do that at all. Like I said, the fascinating case, which Maimonides says, if one person saw the crime looking through one window and the other person saw the crime looking through another window, and both witnesses have not seen each other, the testimony is not accepted. Okay, just to elaborate a little bit, and when it comes to monetary law, however, we could combine them. The question is, what cases can we combine them? Okay, there's one more thing I want to talk about, also connected to what Jill said about when two witnesses come, each one is testifying about the other one's presence. So that's why it's important that they see each other. So this is a very interesting law that the Torah itself writes. The Torah says, you may not place your hand with a wicked person to testify. So here's the scenario. Let's say I know for a fact I saw an event happen. I know this happened. I saw the act. Then I see that somebody else, a false witness, is showing up to court and also wants to testify about what happened. But I know that that person is either not trustworthy. Okay, let's put it this way. Here's the law. The law is, if I saw an event, I know for sure the story happened. I saw it with my own eyes. Nobody else saw it. The only other person who saw it is someone that I know to be a person who is not believable. I know that person is not trustworthy. I know that person is a bank robber. So can I come together with a bank robber to testify about an event? Now I know the event happened. I was there. So am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to show up with a witness whose character is not good? In other words, really, he should not be trustworthy because the Torah calls him a rasha. The Torah calls him a wicked person. The question becomes, am I allowed to combine with a wicked person if I know the testimony to be true? And the answer is that the verse says clearly, do not place your hand with a wicked person to testify. Even if I know that the witness is saying the truth because I saw the event, I cannot combine and be part of a group with a person of questionable character. Why is that? Well, the Torah doesn't say that. The reason is because I need two trustworthy members of society to be witnesses. And here we don't have two trustworthy members of society because even though I know it's true because I was there, but the other person is not a trustworthy member, right? Suppose the other person is a bank robber, but nobody else knows he's a bank robber. I'm the only one who knows he's a bank robber. So I'm not allowed to combine and join a group of witnesses together with that person. That is the law that's written in the Torah black on white. So what do we derive from that? We derive that when I have to be critical, I have to examine the person that I am joining with. I have to know that you're trustworthy. Because if you're a wicked person, I can't combine with you to form a group of witnesses. So this is support to Jill's point, that it's very important that when you come together with somebody else, you implicitly are testifying regarding that other person's credibility. And therefore, you can't come with a wicked person. It's possible also that therefore you can't come with a person who you don't know that they saw it because they saw the event through a different window. Okay. Now, just one more case to show how the limitation of this law, where you do not combine witnesses, and then we'll go to another concept. So the other law is as follows. The other law is, we know that there is a concept called, we discussed this in the past, not in this series, but we discussed this in the past, that in Talmudic times, the way to establish title, it wasn't so organized. You couldn't go to town hall and find, and the town hall kept the record of who owns the title where, to which lot. You also couldn't buy title insurance because society was not as peaceful as it is today. So how would you prove title? So the Talmud has a fascinating system. It's called a chazaka. If I prove that I lived on the land for 3 years consecutively and there was no protest, that supports my claim for title. So if I claim I bought it, and they tell me, where's your receipt? I say, I have no receipt, but I've lived on this land and used this land for 3 years, and I was not contested. Nobody came and protested. So if I can produce 2 witnesses that say that I lived on this land for 3 years, that is support to my claim of title. Fine, that's what we discussed in the past. That's fascinating. There's a whole chapter in the Talmud about this specific question. Okay, now let me ask you a question. What happens if I want to establish title? I want to say I bought this house on Millbank Avenue and I lived here for 3 years and it was uncontested. Nobody protested. They say, where are your witnesses? I say, sure, I got plenty of witnesses. Person A testifies that I lived here in 2019. Person B testifies that I lived here in 2018. And person C testifies that I lived here in 2017. Wonderful. I have 3 witnesses that testify that I was here for 3 years. Says Maimonides, that testimony cannot be accepted because here we have 3 distinct people testifying about 3 distinct years. That doesn't work. We need 2 witnesses testifying about 3 years. So that's the limitation. Even when you have to sort of combine the testimony of 2 witnesses and who have not seen each other or have not necessarily seen the same event, but the way Maimonides puts it, each one of those 2 witnesses has to testify both about the complete matter. In the case we discussed before, prior to the case of the field, establishing title, one witness says, I owe Jill $100. The other witness says, I owe Jill $100. So each one is testifying to the entire claim, to the $100 claim. And therefore, we can combine both their testimonies, and I indeed owe Jill $100. But in the case of the title, that's different, because each witness is not testifying that to the entire totality of the claim. There's no each witness is not saying that I've seen all 3 years. Each witness is only testifying to part of the claim. If each witness only testifies to part of the claim, then you cannot combine them. That is the next point that we make at the end of chapter 4. And we still have a few more minutes, so maybe we'll move a little to chapter 5 for the fun of it.
Rabbi, how much of this is rational and how much of it is chok?
I don't know if it's rational. Depends what you call rational. In other words, if you tell me that would I think of these laws without the Torah, probably not, right? But now that the Torah says it, could we see what type of value the Torah is trying to uphold? I see the logic. I'm not saying I would have come up with it on my own, right? But I see the logic. You could. I'm not saying to some degree you could see the logic. If you accept the premise that you need 2 witnesses, then the next step is that 2 witnesses have to see the entirety of the act. I think it's quite logical. You can argue, why do I need two witnesses? That may be a chok, may not be a chok. That may be logical or not. But I think Maimonides, that's another discussion. The essential question is the requirement to have two witnesses, is that a decree? In other words, is that a logical law, or is there some element that you just have to accept what the Torah says? The answer is it's a combination. We'll get to it as we discuss it. The concept that you need two witnesses is logical, but some of the application, at least according to Maimonides, is not logical. And we'll discuss it when we talk about the ideas of the conspiring witnesses, hopefully coming up in the future. But for the sake of this discussion, I would tell you that if you accept the logical premise, if you accept the premise that you need two witnesses, then most of this chapter is very logical, because you need two witnesses to testify to the totality of the act. But if you have two witnesses and each one testifies for half of the act, it's not going to work. It's not two witnesses. So for example, if one witness would say, I lived in a home for a year and a half, and the other witness says, I lived in the home for a different year and a half, okay? It's not, but I need a totality of 3 years. Then you don't have two witnesses testifying to the totality. You have two witnesses, each one testifying to half. That's not what the Torah meant when the Torah said you need two witnesses. So once you accept the premise, then the application is, I guess, logical.
Thank you.
That's what I would say. Okay, chapter 5 discusses a concept that we mentioned before, and it's a little bit, this one is actually hard to understand. Hard to understand to the extent that Zach made a very good point, and I'll repeat what he said with his permission, I hope. If you don't want me to say it, send me a private message. It's not so bad, don't worry. But I still think that if you think about it, and I've been bothered by this ever since we discussed it the first time, but I think I thought about it somewhat, and I think I do have some explanation. So I'm going to put out the facts, and then I'm going to try to explain it. And if you disagree with me, that's okay, because the explanation is mine. So if you don't like it, feel free to take it down. So here's the law. The law is that if you have a group of witnesses, say 4 witnesses, say 5, say 3, it doesn't matter. You have 100 witnesses. 100 people were standing on Greenwich Avenue and they see a murder, or they see a theft. I'm afraid to say it. You guys are all going to hang up the call. It sounds so crazy, but okay, I'll be brave. I'll try. At least somebody should stay here with me after everyone gets upset and hangs up. No, I'm kidding. So you have 100 people on Greenwich Avenue that see an event. 100 people come to testify in court. Says the Torah. Well, the Torah doesn't say it. The rabbis derive it from the Torah, and they say that if amongst this group of 3 or 100 or 50, it doesn't matter. If amongst this group there is one person who's disqualified, why are they disqualified? Either because they're a wicked person, meaning they're a criminal, or because they're actually a relative to the other group, to someone else in the group. So if one person of this group is disqualified, the entire group is disqualified. Okay, that's strange. If you don't find it strange, then you probably didn't listen. So I'm going to say it again. You have 3 people show up to, in other words, the essential requirement for witnesses is a group of 2. Once you have a group of 2, that's fine. What happens if you don't get 2, you got 3 or 10 or 100, and one person in that group of 100 is disqualified? The entire testimony is disqualified. So that's very strange. Now, Maimonides spells this out. I think I'm going to read it inside. Maimonides spells it out, and he says that's why if there was a murder on Greenwich Avenue, and people show up to court, we basically say, okay, we make a separation. We say who's here because they want to watch the spectacle, they want the show, and who's here actually to testify. And the people who are here to testify, we separate them, and then we interrogate them. But part of the interrogation, as we see, is anyone here disqualified. And if someone is disqualified, the entire group is disqualified. Because in other words, just seeing the event on Greenwich Avenue, let's say I'm walking with my brother on Greenwich Avenue. We see a crime. we're disqualified because we're relatives. Relatives can't testify together. You have to be not related. You have to be unrelated to the judge or to each other or to either party. But let's say me and my brother are walking down Greenwich Avenue and we see a theft. It can't be because there's no theft on Greenwich Avenue, I think. No, I'm kidding. So let's say we both see an event. So that itself does not qualify the witnesses. But if we come to court and we say, yeah, we want to testify, we're part of this group that wants to testify, and then it turns out that we are disqualified, the entire group is disqualified. Now, this is a little bit strange, a little bit hard to understand. And first I'm going to say what the biblical source for this law, where the rabbis derive it from, and I agree that it's not written explicitly in the Torah. It's derived, but it's a very interesting way of derivation. So if you're interested in how the rabbis derive laws from the Torah, this is interesting. So the verse says as follows. The verse says, based on the testimony of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, a matter should be established. That's the verse that says, if you have 2 witnesses, you can accept it as proof, as evidence. So what do you do with this verse? What's the problem with this verse? The verse says, based on the testimony of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses. So the rabbis ask a question. If 2 witnesses are okay, why does the Torah have to explicitly state that 3 witnesses are also okay? Obviously, if 2 are okay, 3 are okay, and 4 are okay, and 100. Why do you have to say 3? The Torah could have just written, based on a testimony of 2 witnesses, a matter should be established, period, end of story. Why do you have to say, or 3 witnesses? That's the Talmudic question on the verse. And that leads the rabbis to derive the following law. The rabbis say, just like if you have a group of 2, and 1 is disqualified, but all of them are disqualified, you have to reject the group of 2. If you have 3 and 1 is disqualified, you have to reject the entire group. In other words, what this teaching is telling you is that the Torah is telling you that a group of 2 and a group of 3 have to be viewed, not that it's a combination of 2 people or 3 people, but they have to be viewed as one unit. And therefore, just like if you have 2 people come and 1 is disqualified, the entire unit is disqualified, the whole group of 2 is disqualified. The Torah says 2 or 3, meaning to equate the 3 to the 2. And therefore, when 3 people come, don't look at them as 3 people. And therefore, if 1 guy is disqualified, you send him away and then you accept the other 2. No, you have to reject all 3. And we discussed this. Now it's coming back to me. We discussed this in the beginning, and we also mentioned the reason, but I have a different reason here. The other reason I have is as follows. I think that, so that's the verse. The verse is it's an interesting verse. It's interesting. That teaches why the Torah employed the extra word. But what's the logic of this verse? Why is it that if 100 people show up and 1 person is found to be lying, you reject the entire group? I know if you're a prosecutor, you don't like this law, you can't prosecute crime like this. But what's the teaching? What's the value? What's the value that the Torah is trying to uphold by presenting this law? That's the question that's bothering us this morning. And a possible solution, I've searched and I have not seen this written anywhere, but I think this could be true. The possible solution is as follows. We're trying to get into the mind frame of this witness who is part of a group. Say 30 people show up to court and they say, we saw the crime. I haven't seen the crime. I was there, but I wasn't there. I didn't actually see it, but I heard the gunshots. Everybody else saw it. So I say, you know what? Why don't I join to strengthen the case? So I joined to strengthen the case. But I know I didn't really see it. But I say I was almost there. I almost saw it. I saw the first half. But everybody else saw it. So it must be true. So why don't I join everybody else? In other words, the danger of having 3 witnesses or 100 witnesses or 10 witnesses, the danger is that they're going to be following the group, like group thinking. They're going to be following the group. Each person says, I don't have to be so sure about my testimony because I'm anyway not the one. They're not really relying on me. They're relying on the other members of the group. Anytime you have a group, it's hard for each person to realize I'm critical in this group. So what's happening here? Here, the Maimonides, quoting the Talmud, quoting the Torah, is saying a fascinating thing. If you're here as a group of 3 or 100, it doesn't matter. If you're part of a group testifying that somebody committed a crime and therefore we want to kill that other person, we want to impose capital punishment, don't feel like you're part of a larger group and therefore it's not on your shoulders, it's on the shoulders of the group. No, you better be sure that you saw this, because we are relying on nobody but you. But you're going to say there's another 100 witnesses, but from the perspective of the law, there aren't 100 witnesses, it's just you. And to prove that point, what we will tell you is that if you're disqualified, all 100 are disqualified. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to highlight to you and bring the point home to each individual person, part of this group, that don't follow the group. Don't follow group thinking. The entire testimony resides on your words. And therefore, you better be careful. You better be sure that you know what you saw and you're not relying on other people. Because if you're going to be disqualified, everybody will be disqualified. So this may or may not be the interpretation of the law, or the interpretation of what the Talmud is saying, but I think that I like this. So if I like it, I think at least I could say it, and if someone wants to disprove it, now is the time. Just to summarize quickly some of the points that we discussed today, we discussed that part of the concept of the Torah says there have to be 2 witnesses, and 1 witness is disqualified. Part of that concept is not only do we need 2 witnesses, but each witness has to see the other witness. That's one point. And another point is that if there's a group of 3 witnesses or 100 witnesses, anything more than 2, the law would be that if one is disqualified, everyone is disqualified, which is obviously a strange law. Jill wants to know if it's a decree, if it's a chok, if it's a decree we accept because the Torah says it, or we accept it based on logic. I guarantee you this is something that we just accept because the Torah says. No logical person would come up with this law. But once we accept what the Torah says, I think that there is some logic here. And I think the logic is, it's very dangerous to have a large group of witnesses. 3 witnesses is dangerous. I ask you a question. Let me put it to you this way. Who would you trust more, a group of 2 or a group of 3? Or a group of 10? So on the surface, you say the more the merrier. 10 people, trust 10 people more than trust 2 people. But upon deeper contemplation, I'm not so sure that's the case. It's possible that I trust 2 people more than 3 or more than 10. Because if 10 people see it, then some of this group, or maybe all this group, each person is relying on the other person. And maybe they're not as careful about what they're saying that they themselves saw it, because they say everybody saw it. So in some sense, 2 people are actually more. I should trust 2 people more because they know that this imposition of capital punishment or any other testimony is based on their words and their words alone. So the gravity of the situation, the seriousness of the situation weighs on their shoulders alone. If that's the case, then the Torah wants to make the point, the radical point, to a large group of witnesses. And we say, I know you're a large group, but make no mistake, every single individual, the entire testimony rests on every single individual. So you better make sure that you know what you're saying and you actually saw it. And how are we going to bring home the point that the entire testimony is based solely on what you say? The way we're going to bring home that point is by making this seemingly radical law, that if 1 person of this group is disqualified, everybody is disqualified. And if you do that, then every individual realizes that the weight of this testimony lies on them fully and completely, and therefore they have to be as truthful as they could, or as honest as they could. And this is my theory. I may be wrong. If anybody wants to make any comments on anything we said today, please go ahead. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. And if this was too much, because it was too much law, come back tomorrow for the romance, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, lesson 3. That's where the action is. In any case, have a wonderful day. And if anybody wants to make any comment, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was a beautiful explanation from the point of view of a responsible person about the third person being testified. But what if the 3rd person is not as responsible as you are, and in fact may be a relative over somebody committing a crime? So he may show up just to disqualify the whole group. That's
Zach's point. Zach said the last time as a joke, maybe he's serious. Zach said he was starting a company. If you want to commit a crime, you hire him and he'll employ a false witness to join your proper witnesses, and then they'll disqualify the whole group. So there are ways to test it, to protect against that. And I alluded to earlier, I have to make sure I am not testifying as part of a group with people that I don't know. Because if I don't know that other person, then that person may be wicked and I'm not allowed to join a group that is wicked. So let's say me and Vicky, we both saw a crime amongst 100 people, and those 98 people show up in courts. We show up in court and we say, we're coming to court, but we're not part of that group. We're a different group. How could we be a different group? They say, why don't you join that group? We say, we don't know. We don't know who's in that group. And also, we have not seen that group. We didn't pay attention. Remember earlier today, we said that each witness has to see the other witness. So I have the full right to show up with you and say, I'm not part of that group of 98 people. Me and Vicky, we're in our own group. And you know what? I didn't read that portion, but if that's the case, and those 98 people are disproved, me and Vicky, our testimony still stands. Why? Because we're a separate group. And if you have two groups of witnesses, you disprove one, you don't disprove the other. So there are ways of protecting against dishonest people joining my group. So if me and you are going to court and someone shows up and says, oh, I've been there too, I say, that's fine, make your own group. You're not part of our group. Because I have to be able to have seen my group, and I have to trust the people in my group. Now, since that's the case, if 4 people show up and we've seen something together, and the 5th guy shows up and we say, look, I think that guy's a good guy. He could join with us. He was there. Probably he was with us. We don't know him to be someone who's dishonest, and we include him in our group. And now we show up in court and we have 5 people. The danger of 5 people is each one says, yeah, I didn't see the actual pulling of the trigger, but I heard the bullet, and I heard, and everyone else saw it. So I guess I'll join to strengthen the point. So if my logic is true, it could be it's not true. But if my logic is true, I say it's dangerous to be part of it. It's dangerous for the court to accept testimony of a big group. Because you know what? Big groups are actually less trustworthy than small groups. And now I remember that I had a conversation with Zach about this. Zach
thank you. Yeah, thank you,
Big groups
Rabbi.
are more dangerous because the problem with big groups is that each person relies on the other person. Okay, that's the story in short.
Thank you, Rabbi. It brings not only the responsibility